some of this sunshine that we're getting. I have been waiting for a sunny day to film this video, and I've been waiting for about a week now. It has been overcast for far too long, and we are really enjoying this sunshine. This video is the third video in a short series about gardening basics. But the first video we talked about hardiness zones, frost dates, and growing season. In the second video we talked about healthy soil. And this video is going to focus on garden location, especially in regard to the amount of sunlight that your garden needs. I will also touch on a couple other things to think about, along with a tip about how to make sure that you're getting the right garden location. Now you can see behind me, we have a fairly big yard. Our yard is actually broken into two parts, one on the north side of the house, and then behind me, you can see this is on the south side of our house. And our property is actually located on the top of a hill. To the west, our yard slopes down to the road. To the east, our yard slopes down to the pond. To the north, it actually slopes down the driveway. And the north yard also has a lot of trees that make way too much shade. So we knew that wasn't going to be a good option for the garden location, which left us with the southern part of the yard, which is what you see now. Where we have our garden, it was kind of the largest, flattest, most open part of the yard. So that's what we chose for a garden. Now, to me, full sun meant the garden would be in the sun from morning until evening. And I had no idea that it was even possible to get too much sun, but we have had a few instances where our tomatoes and peppers have actually gotten sunburned. Full sun actually means 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, and that is a much smaller requirement than I initially thought. Most garden plants are going to require full sun, but some will do okay with partial sun, which is 3 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. Things like broccoli and cauliflower, carrots, potatoes, radishes, lettuce, and other leafy greens, they will do great with partial sun. And actually, things like lettuce would prefer afternoon shade during the most intense heat. And then you also have partial shade, which is 3 hours of direct sunlight. And then you have shade, which is less than 3 hours of sunlight, deep shade, which is no sunlight at all. And of course, there you're not going to be getting any vegetables. When you start looking at the actual requirements of sunlight, you might be surprised at some of the garden location options that become available that you might not have thought about before. When I originally thought the garden needed sunlight basically all day, that really only left us with one option because we have so many trees in our yard. Now knowing that the requirement is 6 to 8 hours, that would actually open up more options for us. So say that you have an area that gets sunlight from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or say from noon until 6 p.m. Or even if you had an area that got sunlight from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m., you're still hitting those requirements. It's just going to depend on how the garden is oriented. Is it on the east or the west side of your house, the north or the south? All of those things are going to affect the amount of sunlight and shade that an area gets throughout the day and throughout the season. A simple way to figure this out is called sun mapping. And if you look this up online, it's going to tell you that you're going to mark out the area you're looking at, and then you go out once every hour and track how the sun and the shade move through that area. Now, ideally, you would want to do this throughout an entire season or even an entire year. And then you are going to be so well informed about the options that you have available on your property. Now, personally, I could never be that patient to wait an entire year to get my garden started. So I would just make my best guess. You'll take into account things like trees that will cast shade onto your garden. For example, this tree line to the south of our garden will cast shade on the garden all winter because the sun never gets high enough in the sky to get above the trees. However, in the summer, it does get far enough north in the sky that the garden is in full sun. And now you can see it's the middle of March and the sun is finally well above the trees. We also have to take into account the tree line that we have to the east of our garden. This tree line casts shade on the garden until around 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning in the summer. And of course, the part of the garden that is the furthest away gets sunlight earlier. And then as the sun continues to rise, the part closer to the trees also gets sunlight. By 10 o'clock in the morning in the summers, our entire garden is in full sun, and then it is in full sun for the rest of the day until just before sunset when the sun gets behind these trees across the road from us. You will also want to take into account any buildings you have that are going to cast shade as well. Maybe your garden is going to be up around your house, or maybe you have a garden shed or something like that. The closer you are to that building, the longer period of shade you're going to have. Now we're back up at the house. I'm going to show you this. This is our cottage garden, and it is right on the west side of our house. It goes from the house about 20 feet out. Right now it is about 12:30, and the part where I am sitting up against the house about 4 feet out is still in the shade. However, this part at the fence that you can see has been in the sunlight since about 10 o'clock this morning. And you can tell there's a big time lapse in the difference in the amount of sunlight that it's getting just in 20 feet. It takes quite a while for the sun to get high enough in the sky to get over the roof of our house and to get sunlight up on this west side of our house. But then once it does, it's in full sunlight the rest of the day until it gets down behind those trees on the west side of the road there. Okay. So at the beginning of this, I mentioned that you might want to have more than one garden site in mind before you start trying to figure out which one is going to work the best. And the reason that is so important is because sunlight is not the only factor that you're going to want to consider when you're choosing the best site for your garden. You're also going to want to consider if the area is prone to flooding. Maybe you don't want the most level part of your yard. If it's sloped away a little bit, that would help the water drain away from your garden site and maybe help you manage that water situation a little bit better. Maybe your entire yard is on a slope and you're gonna have to find a way to deal with that terrain and maybe do some simple terracing to get an area that you're able to work and plant. You don't want to forget to take into consideration is the proximity of the site to where you spend a lot of time. I know in the busiest part of the season, I'm in the garden at least twice a day, if not more. You can see I'm sitting in the cottage garden, which is just right out our front door. And you can see our garden. It doesn't seem too far from the house, but after about the third trip to the garden and back, it starts to feel like a mile. If I forgot a tool, or maybe I'm out weeding and one of the kids needs me, or maybe one of the kids is napping and I need to go back and forth to check on them. That starts adding up a lot of extra time and a lot of extra steps. So truly, I do wish that our garden was closer to the house. It was not an option at the time. And one final thing to think about is water. When we first started our garden, we just had 2 beds. And to water it, we were bringing water from the house out to the garden, and we would run these long hoses from the house out to the garden to water. And it wasn't a huge deal, but as we expanded, it became a bigger task, and we were having to put the hoses away each time so we could mow. And we finally got a water line trenched out to the garden and put a hydrant in, and that is such a blessing. So access to water is another really important thing to think about. So now what do you do with all of this information? You do want to put some thought into selecting your garden site, because you're not going to want to put in all of this work and then decide that you need to move it because it's just not going to work. If you're like me, you're not going to want to wait an entire year to get your garden started. So how do you make sure you're getting the best garden site that you can? My tip for you would be utilize container gardening for the first year. You might not have the biggest garden that you would like to have, but you're going to have something, and something is always better than nothing. We have used everything from flower pots to empty mineral tubs to old feed bunks as beds. And we've been able to grow everything that we've tried to grow in those. You just want to make sure that whatever you're using is an appropriate depth for the roots of the plant that you're growing. You could easily grow things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, carrots, lettuce in containers, and enjoy a harvest while you're studying potential garden sites. Your garden does not have to look like anyone else's garden. Grow what you love and keep it simple. If you have a minute to share, I would love for you to comment below with what gardening zone you're in and what you're up to. Are you starting seeds? Are you planting? Or are you in a warmer zone and actually harvesting something right now? Well, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next video.